Um, Starting a new series today, and just wanted to give a brief intro before we bring in our guest, Matt Licklider from LIOCO. Rosé is a category that's often not taken seriously as the noble whites and reds of the world. And I get it. There is an ocean of some of the most unpleasant wines imaginable out there that come in the color pink. But there's also an equal, if not greater, amount of sublime examples that have a versatility at the table, and beyond that, maybe unparalleled in the wine world. From serious Bandol Rosé to more structured Cabernet Franc, from the Loire to something more delicate from high altitude Provence sites, you have so many options for superb bottlings from a multitude of grape varieties and at some great price points up and down the ladder. Today is really the perfect day to start our new series on everything rosé, with the temperature here in New York getting up to 70 plus and outdoor dining about to seriously kick in, we all hope. Let's hope we have a summer we can get back to sharing a bottle of rosé at a picnic more frequently than we have the last 14 months. Over the next few months, we're going to explore many of these rosés and so many varieties and terroirs from some of the world's great growers. We're going to start in California with my old friend Matt Licklider of LIOCO, before venturing to the south of France and taste rosé from Provence and Bandol. We'll also be going to the Loire Valley to taste some of the amazing Cabernet Franc and Gamay rosé that are made there. Pinot Noir from Burgundy and also the Loire Sancerre will be on the menu too. We'll look at all those kind of delicious bottles, the history, the varieties, the winemaking, ageability, and farming through the lens of the superb 2020 vintage. All around the world today, the fashion is for very pale and lightly colored rosé. The best have a salinity and racy freshness that is the perfect foil for almost any seafood or shellfish. The worst are kind of watery, oversulfured, almost painful. At the other extreme, you have great, more sturdy styled rosé that are almost red in nature, and in many cases are truly built for aging. These too can be extraordinary when the balance and the texture all come together. An old Bandol Rosé, for example, is really one of the great examples of this category. Our friend Eric de Saint-Victor of Chateau de Pibernal loves to talk about Bandol Rosé as the perfect wine for the holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, where they can do everything but set the table for you. They pair perfectly with all kinds of celebratory meals with a tremendous diversity of food. In between, you can have literally a million variations, and so many of them perfect on their own. Two of my favorite varietals are ones we're going to discuss tonight and then going forward, Carignan and Cinsault. Tonight we're going to talk about Carignan, and it's an amazingly compelling grape that you don't see as often as a soloist on the rosé field. It's late ripening and was once the main character in many of the Languedoc hillside vineyards. It loves a warm climate, which today with global warming is important, and it typically produces about 4 times the fruit of Cabernet. However, it is prone to mildew, needs to be hand harvested, which led to Carignan being pulled up in the 90s. Almost 50% of it was cut in the 90s in the south of France in place of flashier grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Old vine Carignan, fully ripened on infertile soils in a warm summer, can produce great wines. The key is the yields have to be restricted, and you have to have enough of that ripe fruit character to deal with the tannins and the acidity, which can be pluses, and we're going to discuss that with Matt in a second. In terms of rosé, this is a denser, what I describe as kind of a rustic, old school rosé. There's this rustic strawberry and cherry fruit that you get in great Carignan rosé. The LIOCO Carignan has some of that lift and tension that you find in the trendier, paler rosé, but you have more character, structure, acidity, savory red fruits that are really compelling. And frankly, these are some of the rosés that some of the great growers the world over and wine lovers talk about in reverence. They go with a million things from meats and all kinds of dishes to salmon and all kinds of other things in between. We're going to talk today about Mendocino County and Carignan old vines. And let's bring in our guest and my dear friend Matt Licklider. Welcome. Starting a new series today, and just wanted to give a brief intro before we bring in our guest Matt Licklider from LIOCO. Rosé is a category that's often not taken seriously as the noble whites and reds of the world. And I get it. There is an ocean of some of the most unpleasant wines imaginable out there that come in the color pink. But there's also an equal, if not greater, amount of sublime examples that have a versatility at the table, and beyond that, maybe unparalleled in the wine world. From serious Bandol Rosé to more structured Cabernet Franc, from the Loire to something more delicate from high-altitude Provence sites, you have so many options for superb bottlings from a multitude of grape varieties and at some great price points up and down the ladder. Today is really the perfect day to start our new series on everything rosé, with the temperature here in New York getting up to 70 plus and outdoor dining about to seriously kick in, we all hope. Let's hope we have a summer we can get back to sharing a bottle of rosé at a picnic more frequently than we have the last 14 months. Over the next few months, we're going to explore many of these rosés and so many varieties and terroirs from some of the world's great growers. We're going to start in California with my old friend Matt Licklider of LIOCO, before venturing to the south of France and taste rosé from Provence and Bandol. We'll also be going to the Loire Valley to taste some of the amazing Cabernet Franc and Gamay rosé that are made there. Pinot Noir from Burgundy and also the Loire Sancerre will be on the menu too. We'll look at all those kind of delicious bottles, the history, the varieties, the winemaking, ageability, and farming through the lens of the superb 2020 vintage. All around the world today, the fashion is for very pale and lightly colored rosé. The best have a salinity and racy freshness that is the perfect foil for almost any seafood or shellfish. The worst are kind of watery, oversulfured, almost painful. At the other extreme, you have great, more sturdy styled rosé that are almost red in nature, and in many cases are truly built for aging. These too can be extraordinary when the balance and the texture all come together. An old Bandol Rosé, for example, is really one of the great examples of this category. Our friend Eric de Saint-Victor of Chateau de Pibernal loves to talk about Bandol Rosé as the perfect wine for the holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, where they can do everything but set the table for you. They pair perfectly with all kinds of celebratory meals with a tremendous diversity of food. In between, you can have literally a million variations, and so many of them perfect on their own. Two of my favorite varietals are ones we're going to discuss tonight and then going forward, Carignan and Cinsault. Tonight we're going to talk about Carignan, and it's an amazingly compelling grape that you don't see as often as a soloist on the rosé field. It's late ripening and was once the main character in many of the Languedoc hillside vineyards. It loves a warm climate, which today with global warming is important, and it typically produces about 4 times the fruit of Cabernet. However, it is prone to mildew, needs to be hand harvested, which led to Carignan being pulled up in the 90s. Almost 50% of it was cut in the 90s in the south of France in place of, flashier grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Old vine Carignan, fully ripened on infertile soils in a warm summer, can produce great wines. The key is the yields have to be restricted, and you have to have enough of that ripe fruit character to deal with the tannins and the acidity, which can be pluses, and we're going to discuss that with Matt in a second. In terms of rosé, this is a denser, what I describe as kind of a rustic old school rosé. There's this rustic strawberry and cherry fruit that you get in great Carignan Rosé. The LIOCO Carignan has some of that lift and tension that you find in the trendier, paler Rosé. But you have more character, structure, acidity, savory red fruits that are really compelling. And frankly, these are some of the rosés that some of the great growers the world over and wine lovers talk about in reverence. They go with a million things from meats and all kinds of dishes to salmon and all kinds of other things in between. We're going to talk today about Mendocino County and Carignan Old Vines. And let's bring in our guest and my dear friend Matt Licklider, who's probably, let's see, Matt, where's LIOCO? There we go. Hey, Matt, if you are listening, you need to jump off and upgrade your Instagram quickly. I had this happen a week ago. You just need to refresh the app by going to the App Store. Or I can do it on the LIOCO Mat if you want. But it's not going to allow me to bring you in. It says you must upgrade, and I had this happen a week ago. I don't know if you can jump off for a second, and we can jump back on. It's funny, that's coming up with a bunch of people that aren't the guest. Let's see. Matt, I don't know if you can hear me. Hey, Matt, I need to either use LIOCO Mat or you need to do an upgrade of your, quick upgrade of your Instagram. That's cruel. Hey, Matt, you need to upgrade the quick jump off and go to the App Store and just do a quick oh, let's see, there it is. Maybe, hold on one second. Let me see if that works now. That still won't do it. Let's see if I can do LIOCO Mat. There you go. Let's see. Gotta have faith. The Wi-Fi God. See, Matt. There we go. Matt, hold on one second. I invited you. We're gonna same. Hey, Matt, jump off the live and go to the App Store and just do a quick upgrade and come back in. It'll only take. Matt Stinton, you've got the same issue. Just FYI, when you're ready to. It's funny, you can see. I can see it here. It's a brand. Yeah. So we're gonna be talking a lot about Carignan today, and it's a beautiful varietal that's kind of you know, you used to see it in the south of France all the time, and it kind of got pushed aside. Now it's making a major comeback. Matt and his winery was one of the big leaders in that because fashion. I'm just waiting for see if we can get Matt to upgrade the LIOCO. Try one. This is going to go on my list of things I've got to create. As anybody who knows me that I am the. Let's see, hold on, Matt. It looks like he's thinking. Let's try it again. Matt, I'm still not getting that. You still need to upgrade either LIOCO Mat or the LIOCO Wine Instagram to on the App Store. It'll take just a couple seconds. Yeah, it's just still. One second. Usually go live with LIOCO Wine Co. Yeah, but the LIOCO Mat one is not either. It's just, they both need to be upgraded. Apology. Yeah, unable to. We're gonna. Yeah, it is kind of crazy that we're starting this thing today on an amazingly beautiful day here. I was thinking about turning the AC. here in the city, it's going to be, I don't know, it feels like it's way over 70. Okay, let's see. Hopefully Matt is upgrading. Let's just take one more. Okay, either of them on here at the moment, so hopefully that. Well, I appreciate the patience, folks who are hanging. Okay, let's try once. Cedric, how you scrolling through, just trying to see when Matt's gonna pop back. Let's see. I had this happen a week or so ago. I jumped off, but let's see. Let's LIOCO. There we go. Let's see if that... I'm so excited to talk a little bit about your rosé, because I think it's beautiful. Today, you're not here in New York, but it could not be a more perfect day to start our Everything Rosé. It's 70. It feels even more. I mean, I'm in Bermuda shorts and a short sleeve shirt, and it's really hopefully with that the pandemic is gonna continue to go in the right direction, and we're gonna really be able to get out and enjoy some rosé and with folks here moving forward. Let's hope that's the case.
Yep.
So I want to start, before we dive into this beautiful Rosé and Carignan as a grape, and Mendocino, and we're going to talk even a little bit about, I mean, I love it that I get to pull in steelhead and trout into the conversation. I mean, that is like a dream come true on this thing. So, I want to just a little bit of your history in wine, because, LIOCO has its roots in Europe in many ways, and your kind of beginnings in the wine career. And for those folks who don't know, you and I have kicked stones together in vineyards, and, sipped a few glasses and carried a bag together in more than one city, and with great pleasure. I want to give a little bit of your beginnings, and some of the fun part too, where I think it was you were skiing and, biking and whatever. I mean, like 100 days a year, and when in your days in the Rockies for, I mean, that was a pretty sweet gig you had with the Maxwells.
Yeah, I should have never left that business. Yeah, first of all, I wanted to commend you on your beautiful and eloquent soliloquy about Carignan. That might be the first of its kind in history of wine speak. But no, I think you really captured some of the magic, the reasons that we think this grape is compelling, and well done there. So yeah, my background in wine began in the Rockies. I had some great sources of inspiration there. I was living in Aspen at the same time. Bobby Stuckey and Richard Betts, Damon Arnowski, Jay Fletcher, Jeff Walker, the late great Jeff Walker. There were just a lot of great wine personalities in the mountains who, when they weren't skiing or on their bikes, were diving deeply into wine, and there was this kind of spirit of apprenticeship and openness around bringing young people up, and we were all kind of learning together. But there were some masters there too, and the guy that really lit my fire was Damon Arnowski. He was a great skier and a great cyclist, and someone that I looked up to as an alpinist, but also incredibly passionate about wine. And I was just a lowly waiter in a restaurant, and he was queuing up the servers to learn about the wine list, and just listening to him talk about Burgundy, and then putting a Chambolle Musigny, 93 Dujac Chambolle Musigny to my nose as a 22 or 23-year-old kid. That was the beginning for me. And
not a bad place to start.
Right. And I think, like a lot of people, I kind of gravitated early on to kind of Zinfandel, big ripe red wine Zinfandels back then, and kind of bigger, riper Pinot Noirs. And then the more I was tasting and had opportunities to taste, I soon found myself deeply head over heels in love with European wine and traditional European wines that showed a sense of place and were really soil driven in their profile. So you know, I had a few different lives, a few different turns at the wheel, working with European wines. One of them with you, as you know, and all the while, you know, kind of thinking about, wow, wouldn't it be fun to try and replicate this in some way in my home state, which I'm also deeply passionate about. Although I had some great years in Colorado, I think I'm really a dyed-in-the-wool Californian, as you know, and everything that I love. In fact, I'm one of the only people you ever meet who actually loves the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors equally, which much to the chagrin of my Southern California family. Because
and your buddy from Boston, if you remember.
Yeah, true. The Boston Celtics thing made a lot more sense, but no, I love the whole state. I grew up in the South. I've made a life for myself in the North, and I am deeply passionate about this place and all that it offers. So that's all wound up in LIOCO, and that really. That curiosity and that for this place, California, and combined with the inspiration we took from our European experience, is what LIOCO is. It's this nexus between what's possible in California and what we know has been done for a millennium in Europe.
So I'm going to jump around a lot, but you know, we had some great years, and I know your love of European wines and Europe, Italy and France in particular, and wines of kind of balance, texture, character, place, as you described. And that was the focus of what you wanted to accomplish at LIOCO when you first, you know, started that adventure. And you know, I was thinking back on it and last night, and thinking about going around to tastings with you and some of the people who worked with you at some of the Pursuit of Balance tastings, which, you know, I feel like there was, and I say this with all due respect, I think you're doing the most interesting, character-laden wines that you set out to do in the last 3 or 4 years that you've ever done. I really think we said this last time we were in New York together, and I just think there's this progression and this kind of understanding of where you are that you've kind of taken hold of and taken ownership of in a real serious way. And part of that I was reflecting on is that you didn't start with like a Cabernet Sauvignon vineyard and you know, Napa Valley on the, you know, you went out searching for some of the more interesting places in the state. I mean, John Bonnet wrote about that. And you know, I think this wine is a great example of that, of searching for kind of character, place, off the beaten track to a certain degree. So maybe talk about this wine and the place where this comes from, because it's special. It's a special place in the state of California. It has a, you know, it's a place that I didn't even think about the connection to my, you know, I mean, Steve and I, our late dear friend, Steve Gilbertson, we used to drive up to the, you know, the headwaters of the Russian River to fish. I mean, that was something that's in a holy place for fly fishermen in many ways, and much else, frankly. Talk about that place and what makes that special, kind of the origins of this vineyard.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that became evident to me in my experience with European wine all those years is that vines develop character through adversity, like people, right? In that regard. And
totally.
And so the more a vine struggles, generally speaking, the more characterful the wine. And so we knew that we were not going to be readily attracted to fertile valley floor, you know, lock, stock, and barrel vineyards. We wanted to go out there and find the really extreme sites where the vines were planted at their absolute limits, on the margins. That was not something that was really proved positive in California viticulture when we started. It's amazing how much has changed in 15 years. But in the early days, that wasn't really being talked about. I think there were a couple of beacons that we had to refer back to: Ridge, Montebello Cabernet, Mount Eden Vineyards Pinot Noir, Stony Hill, some of these old-timey California wines that were exploring those concepts that had planted vineyards in these rather marginal locations. But
Paul Draper was a big proponent of Carignan, if I remember.
Yeah, that's right.
Particularly, but interesting enough, way back in the day. But that's something you were a pioneer with Carignan. There wasn't a lot of people, doing Carignan when you started doing it.
Right. And we didn't know we wanted to do it. When my former partner and founding partner, Kevin O'Connor, and I started, Burgundy was the primary driver, the driving force, our shared passion. We wanted to explore a négociant label in California with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir primarily, but we also wanted to do some wines from some old-timey grape varieties, some things that were distinctly Californian in nature. And Carignan, wasn't really even on our radar. It was one of many possibilities, but we found a vineyard. We were head over heels in love with it, love at first sight. And it could have been anything. It could have been Cinsault, it could have been Bonarda, it could have been Charbonneau, it could have been Alicante Boucher, it could have been Palomino, it could have been Mission. But in this particular case, we found a Carignan site, and the vines were mid-century and all dry farmed, head trained, growing in this tough, rocky soil. And it was like, yeah, this is it. Let's try and render some wine from this site and from these vines and see where we go. And that was 2006 was our first effort. And I'll never forget, the first two growers that sold us their Carignan grapes both said essentially the same thing, which is, there's no market for this fruit, and the day you guys stop buying it, we're going to rip it up and replant with something else. And that was going on at a large scale in California, meaning a lot of the old-fashioned, old-timey grapes were being replanted with more marketable varieties. And it was a very unfortunate twist of fate there, because if so many of these growers would have just waited another 5 or 8 years, the market for those varieties would have been just absolutely through the roof. Right now, that's what everybody's looking for. And most of it, of course, has been ripped out and will not be replanted. So there were a couple of Carignan sites. We lucked into a couple of them. And I got to tip my hat to New York, because some of the most receptive clients for our early Carignan wines were New Yorkers. They were sommeliers in Manhattan, quite specifically. And we were selling these wines at prices that sommeliers could pour by the glass, and it had a great story. And let's face it, they were really food friendly, whether they were made rosé style or red wine style. They were high acid with tannic. The reds had tannins. They were bright. They were fresh. They were savory. They weren't saccharine, Zinfandel, cherry, cola. There was none of that. The wines you had to wrestle with them a little bit. And they were great with food.
Well, that's the beauty of the grape. I mean, it really is a special varietal in that. And the same thing was happening in Europe. I mean, we're happened as far as tearing up these beautiful old vines, which, we'll talk about kind of the difficulties of dealing with it, and what the challenges are. So this vineyard for this wine. I mean, it's a if I remember the story you told me, it's a sixth generation family. Can you give us the history there?
This is
where's the cuttings come from?
Yeah, so this is a real California trope here. This is a 6th generation grower. The first generation were homesteaders on this property in the 1800s, and the vineyard is located in Talmadge, which is an upland. It's a kind of a cold upland valley north of where we are in the Russian River Valley, about an hour and a half north, not far from Ukiah, and right next to the Redwood Valley. But it's 40 miles from the ocean, but it's significantly north, and the diurnal shift is what you have here. You have a 60-degree temperature swing during the day in the summertime here. And so it gets very warm in the day, but very cold at night, which means for a variety like Carignan, which is a sun-loving grape with a very long ripening arc, it's ideally suited to this climate. In fact, the whole global warming conversation, as you alluded to, also I think is prescient for varieties like Carignan, because these vines just seem to be largely unmoved by all of the problems, the challenges we've had with our weather as it pertains to things like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, So when Chardonnay, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, if you've seen those vines on the hillsides, in the south of France and Corbière, up on these kind of crazy, plateaus with wind, and I mean, they're indestructible.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
they're gnarly as all get out for the most part, correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah. These are head trained plants that are now approaching 80 years old. They're 7 feet, 8 feet tall, with the canopy fully in bloom. And they're like aliens, you walk out in these vineyards and every one of these plants has a presence, a unique presence, right? And you have to regard them all individually, and they all set different amounts of fruit in different places, and it's a wild place. But
it sounds like a Burning Man vineyard.
It could be.
So, talk about the area, because I always think of, I'm going to have to bring it in 2 or 3 times just because I can't resist. So I always think of trout and steelhead in California as being the canaries in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you can protect those species, everything is going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. Mm. And that area is one of the, battlegrounds in some ways for preserving the history of wild run fish from the ocean.
Yes.
I mean, it's an amazing thing to see.
Yes.
And it's, there's so much history there. Does that play anything in the kind of the history of the farming up there as far as how things are farmed?
Yeah, Mendocino was at the forefront of all of the progressive farming movements in California started in Mendocino. I don't know if people realize that, but salmon safe started in Mendocino. Organic started in Mendocino. Biodynamic, Mendocino. Regenerative, Mendocino. So that whole county was way out in front of all of this, and they were doing it not just to greenwash for our for the wine cognoscenze. They were doing it because it was a very pluralistic agrarian society up there, and they believed that the health of the biome was paramount.
Totally.
And the fish were a part of the biome. Oh, Sarah Licklider just walked in the building. We're gonna have to get her to say hello at some point. She loves Instagram Live.
We got to be serious.
Come over
now.
Here. Okay, sorry, but just say hi real quick to David Hinkle and the.
Hey, Sarah.
Hinkle and the crew.
It's great to see you.
We're talking salmon here. So, no, the fish ecology was a big part of that, and as you alluded to, also this area are the headwaters of the Russian River, right? The Russian River begins there, and so these steelhead and similar fish and trout, salmon species, they swim up the Russian River at Jenner, and they go 40 plus miles inland to where the headwaters are to spawn, and it's incredible, right? So fishing has been a big part of California's industry going way back. So there's always been kind of a collective interest in in preserving that ecosystem, thankfully. And the other thing I will say about this wine, the LIOCO Rosé with trout or steelhead, the old adage, things that grow together go together, right?
Totally.
So where you find trout growing, you find Carignan Rosé growing next to it, and it's a magical thing when you put those two things together.
It always works. And frankly, we'll talk about that in a second, because this, to me, it's maybe this is a rosé for salmon or a serious fish, bluefish, for example.
Oily fish.
Name it.
Oily
exactly.
fish. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's talk back to the farming. So the area, the vines there, it's kind of an alluvial. Is that correct?
Yeah, by the nature of it being a river, the genesis of a river valley, it's very complex soil, but it's primarily a clay-based soil with like fist-sized gallet-style stones in it, which are clearly river stones,
Sure.
But there's other material in the soil. There's some volcanic material in the soil too. There was a volcano in the Russian River that blew up in the Russian River Valley that blew up and sent ash all over this area. So, Sonoma County in general, and by extension, the southern end of Mendocino County, has incredibly complex soil. There's 7 or 8 different soil types all mixed together. Actually, Ted Lemon, I think, likes to say there's more soil types in Sonoma County than there are in the whole country of France. Sorry to say, David, but it's a very complex place with all the geologic activity, the tectonic plates grinding to each other, the proximity to this big, huge Pacific Ocean, all of those things.
No,
so
it's an amazing.
One more thing on the soil, because I know you always like to talk about soil, and I love you for that. The primary source of the soil is clay, and the reason that's important with vineyards like this is that soil. We talk about 2 kinds of soil, right? There's soil that retains water, and there's soil that drains water, right? So we buy grapes on both soil types. We buy a lot of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay on sandy soils that drain water, and that gives you a certain profile in wine. We also buy fruit on retaining water soils like clay, and because they don't irrigate this vineyard, it's dry farmed. That's very important. The only water that this vineyard ever gets has to be bound up in this clay-based soil from whatever rainfall we get, in the 4 or 5 months that we actually get rain in California. So I think that for dry farming, clay is actually a pretty nice soil type. It's going to be very difficult to dry farm on sandier soils.
Well, and maybe this is a good time to talk about the vintage 2020, because it's a drought vintage, and it was a pretty seriously challenged vintage on many fronts.
Yep.
Human, the climate.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very, and I think maybe you want to go back to 2008 to give us kind of a little bit of perspective, because you've told me 2008 helped prepare you for 2020 as a vintage.
Yeah,
Can you
for sure.
speak to all that a little bit?
Yeah, it was a similar kind of battle, right? And in 2008, we had lightning storms that kicked off fires that were followed by a weather system where the wind just died, and so all the smoke residual just settled down into the valleys, and there were a lot of damaged. There was a lot of damaged fruit, and there was really no precedent in California for how to handle it. We were all looking to the Aussies for solutions, and there was a wide range of wines made from 2008, from completely undrinkable to shockingly delicious, which is, I think, a very important point. And that's what I want to talk about here, is that I think there's going to be, it would be a mistake to write off a vintage anywhere, and even a vintage with as many challenges as 2020 had, and 2020 was even more challenging than 2008. I'm not trying to make light of what happened here in 2020. It was brutal, right? between the pandemic, 3 or 4 record heat events, 2 or 3 different fire events, the whole West Coast was on fire. It was really, really challenging. But as is often the case, it's a much more complex conversation about where quality wine can be made. And to say that the vintage is a write-off is a generalization that is unfair to a lot of people that work their tails off to bring in clean fruit and render clean wines. And I cannot drive that home hard enough. I will tell you that the talk around the water cooler here in Sonoma County, and I'm talking about with celebrated winemakers here like Pax and Arno Roberts, Raytech, there are going to be some phenomenal, chiseled, flavor dense, low pH wines from 2020. And there were going to be some wines that were never even harvested, right? Like where fruit was just left to die on the vine. So it's the whole range. It depends where you were, what variety was hanging, what was the wind and air transfer in that particular valley, when did you pick the fruit, what did you do to the fruit once you picked it? And that's an important point. Back to your question, some of the things we learned in '08, we developed an entire press cycle and a set of winemaking protocols in 2008 to try and mitigate the damage from smoke that we put into place in 2020 just to be extra safe. And I want to be clear that LIOCO ran a series of micro ferments in our cellar, basically that were going to give us some information about what we could expect. And we only picked fruit that we had confidence in.
I'm assuming with the pandemic, with everything going on, it wasn't like you could go to a lab and do analysis to do what you needed to do. It had to be a challenge to do anything technical.
Yes.
And I assume it was technical.
I'm sorry. It wasn't the pandemic. It was the fact that there was an overwhelming demand for lab analysis, and there are only 2 labs with the equipment to run this kind of testing here. So we could have submitted all kinds of grape samples to the lab here, but by the time we got back the results, given the length of the queue, our picking window would have passed. So the lab became a non sequitur for us. We had to find other data. And ultimately what we came back to was this thing, and this thing, the old fashioned method, your palate.
So how did you test the grapes? How did you come up with whether there was going to be, issues with the smoke, or how did you do it?
So we ran micro ferments or flash ferments, which means we go out and take a grape sample, we fill up a bucket, we smash up the grapes, we light it up because we don't want to wait. We're trying to get fast. We're trying to get fast data in that moment. So we light it, we inoculate it to get the alcoholic fermentation going. Now, the conventional wisdom around smoke taint is if you're going to have problems in the wine with smoke taint, with guaiacol compounds, they will surface perceptibly during the early stage of primary fermentation. So that was one kind of backyard slapdash method of testing our grapes, was conduct a micro ferment in our cellar and then smell and taste and smell and taste. And what we do is we'd let the juice sit on the skins and try and macerate the crap out of this wine, right? In other words, bring as much of the solids into the juice as possible to try and coerce out if there would be a problem.
To make sure that whatever you were getting was clean and didn't have any of the taint that you were concerned about.
Exactly. And so what we found was a wide range. We found some lots showed smoke taint, and we rejected that fruit in the field, which is not an easy thing to do. That's somebody's livelihood that we just walked away from, right?
Sure.
Sure. And especially with things like Carignan, none of those growers have crop insurance. The old timers, they just don't carry it. They've never had to deal with these things that we dealt with last year. Carignan is it's like clockwork. You get a big crop every year, and so none of them had crop insurance. So But we rejected fruit in the field that showed smoke taint. And in other vineyards, in other cases, we agreed to take the fruit. And in the case of this specific wine, the Carignan, it was perceptibly clean to our nose, but when I was watching the smoke patterns and the fires around the area, my brain, my lizard brain, was telling me this fruit's going to have problems. There's no way it's not going to have problems, even though we didn't smell it. So we hedged. We took a very small amount, and we initiated a series of winemaking protocols to further ensure that the wines would be clean. So one of the things we did was we picked the fruit as early as we possibly could, where it still had some phenolic ripeness, but we picked it probably 2 weeks earlier than we might have otherwise. Get it out. The second thing we did is we pressed it incredibly lightly. I have 4 or 5 barrels of hard pressed rosé in the cellar right now that we're going to probably sell off in the bulk market. So we effectively cut our production output by 20–30% and pressed very, very lightly just to get the cream of what was inside that grape. Then we triple settled that fruit. We tried to get that juice off all the particulates and the solids as fast as we could. So you settle it, you rack it, you settle it, you rack it, you settle it, you rack it. And then we ended up with a very clear, very kind of electric turbocharged juice that we let go through its natural fermentation. And that's what we ended up with. And
the beautiful new labels, by the way.
Thank you. I'm not, you know, it's always hard for a vintner to speak about his own wine, you know, without trending into hyperbolic territory. But I'm going to tell you right now, I think this is the best rosé we've ever made. And I think some of that has to do with the extraction on the wine. I think we so gently we extracted this thing like it was Pouligny Montrachet, you know, not like it was Bourgogne Rouge or Bourgogne Blanc. It was a very light extract.
Well, I want to say a couple things, or I want to ask a couple things more importantly. Carignan, I mean, the yields are typically high, so you
Yes.
have a decent amount of juice, even in I'm assuming even in a drought year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like we're not talking about 8 hectoliters per hectare. You still have juice even in a drought year, which I assume this wine is so digestible. First off, there's no way, I mean, I'm sure there's many tasters who are better than I am that maybe could say, this is to me pristine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and it's got a texture, a balance, a freshness to it. It's light on its feet.
Mm-hmm.
There's no heaviness.
Right.
So the extraction, you know, whatever you did was to me, to my eyes, was perfect. It's not heavy at all. The alcohol's what? Just
13.
under 13, I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's 13. Yeah. No, thank you. I wish that it penciled for us to extract that way every year, but that is not going to make a $25 retail wine to extract those kinds of juice yields on an annual basis, unfortunately. So this is a special wine. There's not much of it. The chemistry is perfect. I want you also to know that subsequently we did run lab analysis on the wine, and the guaiacol levels in the wine was below threshold. So the wine is technically clean. And I think what we learned about that is, despite the fact that California was on fire, and that there was a lot, you know, an unspeakable amount of damage, that it was still possible to make a clean wine, a rosé wine of Carignan. And for better or for worse, I think a lot of these growers that have Carignan in their field are now thinking about converting all of their fruit clients to rosé clients. They don't want to incur the additional risk of having to ripen this fruit to red wine sugar levels in what could be a continually challenged environment. So it's kind of an interesting side note about this. It's going to become harder and harder to find growers to sell us red Carignan grapes.
Yeah, I mean, there's the climate situation is definitively an ongoing puzzle and challenge, and Yeah, and I'm not trying to, I think what you made 700 cases or something total.
Yeah, we used to make like 2,000 cases of that wine, and so we've cut it way back, and I like it at this level, and rosé is a crowded field as you're going to delve into. So I think the 700 to 1,000 cases range is a nice spot for LIOCO, and I think we've learned a lot about how to make that wine. It's not the easy years where you get the knowledge, right? It's again, sure. It's when you face a lot of adversity in the vintage where you learn some things. And I have to tip my hat also to our winemaking team, who was making this wine under the worst possible circumstances. It was peak COVID. There were outbreaks at our crush facility. People were wearing double masks. It was hot. It was smoky. It felt like the world was ending. And yet, we came together and we got the work done. And I'm so proud of what we did in 2020. This in Europe, when you visit a grower in Europe, they don't trot out their best vintages. They love to show you the off vintage wines where they had to really show their stuff to get. Well,
it's what you call a winemaker vintage. It really is. And I'll just talk a little bit about the we've talked about the challenges, which are obviously important and super relevant this year and maybe more than ever. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about the wine because it's delicious. And but it's also got a lot of character as a varietal. And, I did bring it up at the beginning, but there is not a lot of solo Carignan that's being produced. Matt, we lost you. There you are.
Sorry.
There's not a lot of solo Carignan Rosé. There's, the red, as you said, now are starting to become fashionable in California in particular. But Rosé, not necessarily. And there's some challenges and there's some big advantages. I've described this, and you can take it as a plus or a minus. I take it as a big plus. I consider it as an old school rosé, and that it's got some density to it. The grape, there's a volume of fruit along with that acidity that Carignan does have, and that kind of the bones of a Carignan, which are significantly, you feel the skeleton of this wine in a real positive way. But there's this underlying freshness. I can almost see the Russian River, but seriously, there's something about it that is really bracingly fresh at the core of this, but with some texture to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple things. Thank you. And, the wine finished with 3.1 pH, natural, no ads. So, that's the first thing. It is fresh. It's electric, right? It also finished with like 7 grams of acid in a blazing hot vintage. Yeah. So that tells you a little bit about what you need to know about old vine Carignan. It's an acid producer, and it was historically used as a blender to provide exactly that, to bring a little acid and tannin into a red blend. So acid is never really a problem here. The fact that there's some there, I think speaks to the age of the vines. Number one, how deep those root systems are. It's never been watered. So the root systems are probably 60 feet down into the substrata, right? And then, you've got this very active, very healthy ecology there, including the biome of the soil. And you have fish, and you have red and gray foxes, and you have coyotes, and you have all manner of flora and fauna. And Mendocino, it's the real deal in that regard, right? So yeah, I think that's all.
It's an amazing place in general, frankly.
What it reminds me of a little bit, David, is that there's kind of in Corsica they call it maquis, or in the France,
totally
the garrigue, right? There's kind of a maquis quality to this wine that makes sense when you visit. You will see there is a resident flora in this area that is singular, and that is present in not just the Rosé, the reds too. Our red Carignan sativa smells like a bouquet de garrigue. It's a bouquet garni kind of thing,
It's perfect to smoke trout on, you realize.
Exactly.
I'm very serious.
Yes. Well, as we said, this wine with trout is a magical pairing.
But that's a great description, and it is kind of a paradise in so many different ways. And I think for the ecosystem, but clearly the wine works too. I see this wine being so versatile for so many different foods and in so many different situations. It really is, with that acidity, with that structure, with that kind of texture, it can do almost anything.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think that's true about most well-made rosé, is its versatility at the table. But I also want to say, I think there's this, as rosé became the it girl, right? I think there was this tendency to think about it as just a kind of crushable, poolside beverage that you drink it out of a plastic cup, you drink it ice cold, you drink it out of the bottle, whatever. And there are those wines, and this is not one of those wines. Can you enjoy it in that capacity? Yes, but I think this is a more serious wine with some real vineyard-driven pedigree, and I think it does age. Actually, we've opened up 8-9-year-old bottles of LIOCO Rosé that are very interesting. They're not as fresh. They've definitely metamorphosized in the bottle and become something else, but they're very interesting wines. And that to me says 100% that there's some there, that this is fruit that is grown on interesting soils, and the vines are old enough to capture that expression. So it's serious rosé, and it's the price kind of belies that, quite frankly.
But if you everything we just said, the structure of the grape, the fact that there is a tannic, there are bones to this wine, the fact that there's that acidity, and you've got these old vines, there's no reason that this isn't going to age. I mean, I think about our buddy Eric de Saint Victor, and there are great rosés that really with age are even better at the table because they take on all these nuances and characteristics. It's tough sometimes to convince people, but there's a reason that some of those wines aren't released. They don't roll them out at Christmas time.
Right.
Like, they aren't ready yet.
Yeah.
And they need time to develop. Do you want to talk just briefly about that?
Yeah, I think, yes. I think the great rosés take on, kind of a white wine character in their capacity to change in an interesting way in the bottle. And this conversation is probably moot because all this wine will be converted into urine before July 4th weekend, right? But for those brave souls who want to put a bottle or two away and test out our theories here, I have no. We've had distributors, not in New York, of course, but in other markets who maybe are a little slow in depleting all of their rosé allocation, and I never have any concern about that. I'm never like, oh my God, you gotta fire sell this wine. It's going to turn into a pumpkin next spring. It's not, and that's despite the fact that we don't put very much sulfur in these wines at all, especially rosé. Very, very little sulfur. But I think it speaks to the structural integrity of the wine, the low pH, the high acid, the fact that there's a lot of dry extract in the wine, and it goes on a journey, right?
It's beautiful. You want to just talk briefly about your label, or your new set of labels, because I do think they're both beautiful, but they also tell a story.
Yeah, there's the four county wines that LIOCO is producing now are, I think, analogous in Europe to Bourgogne level wines. If we're talking about Burgundy, just the very base level wines that still represent a place. And my argument has long been that Sonoma County on a label should mean something. Just as Mendocino County on a label should mean something, just as Santa Barbara County on a label should mean something. And so we've been exploring that over the last 15 years. And not just single vineyard wine. I mean, in other words, you shouldn't have to pay single vineyard wine prices to be transported to a specific place in a bottle. And so, you know, that wine is a Mendocino County Rosé. And what we wanted to show with these 4 county bottlings was a visual representation of this concept. So those are topographical maps of the actual vineyards, or one of the vineyards in the case where we're blending vineyards together, of the vineyards that make that wine. So in this case, this is actually a single vineyard wine. We don't list that in the nomenclature as such, but it is from one vineyard. And that topographical map is the Bartolome Vineyard in Talmadge, California. We had an artist render a topo map, and that's what that is. That's the Bartolome Vineyard.
Cool. Beautiful.
You know, one thing I want to say just before I step off that soapbox is, you know, as a wine lover, a deep wine lover myself, where I would really like to see the conversation go back to, and I know you'll agree with me, David, is back to the idea of place-specific wines, regional wines, district wines, vineyard-driven wines, and away from process. And I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but one bone I have to pick with the whole natural wine world is it seems like they oftentimes want to talk about process. What did they do to the wine? What did they not do to the wine? How much did they put in? How much did they not put in? Too little talk about the place. And I want to see the conversation move back to place and away from process. Process was the wrong track, right? Process is what got California on the wrong track back in the 90s. Parker was driving process, you know, and I know natural wine is on a different track than Parker, but it's still a process-based track. Let's get back to place. Let's talk about vineyards. Let's talk about ecology. Let's talk about biome. And let's talk about how do we capture that in the wine. And that's what those labels are a step in that direction for me.
Well, this wine displays all of that beautifully in a really transparent way that in my mind I literally can see the redwoods and then the river and that whole area, which is so remarkable, and it it's a beautiful wine from what I know was a really challenging vintage. And I mean, just briefly, we don't have the other wines here, but talk about some of the other categories, your whites in 2020, and what, you know, I know this isn't the only wine that you made.
No, well, what I've said about 2020 is stay curious. Just stay curious, you know, and anybody that's listening to this, that probably goes without saying. But, you know, be curious about what your favorite vintners did to handle the challenges of that vintage, right? Let's get the conversation going that way. It's so revisionist and generalist to just say, oh, California was on fire. We'll just take a pass on the vintage and we'll shop for wines in other regions. I mean, that just is, to me, just way too generalized. But the other wines what I wanted to say about 2020 is that LIOCO both rejected grapes in and made wine from every county that we make wine in. Does that make sense? So we rejected fruit in Santa Cruz. We rejected fruit in Sonoma. We rejected fruit in Mendocino. We rejected fruit in Santa Barbara. And we also made wine in all 4 of those counties. So we had a severe triage happening, right? And what I've seen so far is the whites that are done with their mallows and are on their way to bottle, and this 2020 Rosé that's already in bottle, astonishingly high quality, which I said again has been corroborated with other winemakers in our camp. And And I think the reds are showing great promise. It's still early. It's, you know, Pinot Noirs in March are kind of right in they're in mallow. It's kind of a weird time to say they're astonishing. They're not showing that way yet, but they're clean, and they have great bones, and they have great density to them as well. So I'm really excited to tell the story of 2020. I think it's an incredible narrative. I think there's so many spokes that come out of that hub, whether you want to talk about climate change or, you know, the pandemic, or, you know, a lot of these first generation winemakers in our camp really finding their voice. I think it's going to be a fun story to tell. And whether you're a restaurateur or retailer, I encourage you to taste the wines, because there's going to be some really great ones in the bunch.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, for sure.
No, stay tuned and stay curious, as you said. Well, this is a great introduction to the vintage. I appreciate all the passion. I know all the work that went into it, and yeah, I can't wait to see you sometime soon.
Me too, buddy.
I'm gonna have dinner at one of your favorite haunts tonight. So I'll be bringing the leftovers from this around. So.
Well, likewise, Sarah and I can't wait to get back to New York, and it's actually the place we say that'll be the first place we get back on a plane to go visit. You know, from a work standpoint, is New York, and yeah, we've been with you guys all through the pandemic. We've felt your pain, and we can't wait to get back to eating and drinking together. Truly.
Us too, and this is not quite the same, but it's still a treat to see you and talk a little bit, and soon, Matt, soon.
Thank you, David. Thank you for doing this. Thank you guys for all the questions here. I don't know if you want to get to any of these, David, or forward them to me. I know that Cyprian Arlo wants to trade some Rosé Bourgogne for some of our Rosé. I'm going to take that option.
Well, I'll DM you all of the things that we need.
That's great. We'll keep the conversation going.
Well, he's going to be jealous that you just got back from a little surfing, but you know, he's been surfing up and down Les Rocheux is what he's been doing lately. So,
fantastic.
Take care, my friend. Enjoy, and yeah, give Sarah a hug for me.
Thank you, guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you all in person soon.
Ciao, Matt.
Cheers.